I'm sorry, John. All 5 million of you. Before we start today's video, I want to tell you guys that I will be doing live streams again very soon. So if you guys have your own true scary stories you want me to narrate on my live streams, send it to my email at horrorstudio1@gmail.com. And if your name is John, then I'm sorry again. Anyways, guys, grab a blanket, turn off your lights. True scary stories that happened to not to John, but with John. Jeez. Crazy John. This happened a few years back. I was 23 years old, married and had a stepdaughter. I'm female, divorced from my ex now, and do not see my stepdaughter anymore, but at this time, I was living with them, my cousin, her husband, and their son. We had a townhouse on a dead end that led to some train tracks in my hometown. The neighborhood was decent, but had lots of houses close together and was highly populated with children. There were usually toys, bikes, and skateboards hanging around on the sidewalks and on the front lawns of houses. This included our house. We resided in the second and third floor of the house, while our landlord's daughter occupied the first. Shortly after moving in, 2 tenants moved into the basement apartment, a middle-aged couple. They seemed alright, but were eerily quiet at first. They started showing some signs of drug use and just started showing some odd behaviors. For example, they would scream at the top of their lungs at each other over petty things, like wanting a ride somewhere, or not wanting to give the ride. They were starting to scare our kids. I had a bad feeling about the guy, John. In our state, we have access to criminal records. We can search anybody's state police record. I exercised that right, and found out that this guy had a pending sexual assault charge against a child under 12. Now I was terrified. Scared of the kids playing outside, scared of the kids being in the same building as this guy. Weird things started happening, like we would wake up in the morning and the kids' toys would be broken, not just broken, but destroyed. Skateboards would be completely broken in half, a wagon was completely mangled, and the toys were thrown down an embankment we had behind our house. We all had a feeling it was him, but couldn't prove it. One day the shit hit the fan, per se. Tension had already started to build. It was clear we didn't like each other, but everyone was so passive-aggressive about everything until this day. I was dropping my ex off at work, while my cousin kept an eye on the kids while they played at the neighbor's house in their fenced-in yard. My phone rang when I was a few blocks away from home. It was my cousin. I remember her saying, "I think we're gonna have a problem." I asked her why, and she said, "John is throwing shit down the embankment and knocking over the garbage bins." My first thought was, those things were full, he must be making a fucking mess, and boy was I right. I pulled into the driveway to see all of our recyclables scattered across the edge of the driveway. It made my blood boil. I got out of the car and looked over at his door, on the side of the house. I saw him throw something out of the doorway and we met eyes. As soon as that happened, I took that chance to confront him. I yelled over to him, "What's the fucking problem? Why are you throwing shit all over the place?" He didn't take a minute. He literally started charging at me, saying, "What the fuck are you gonna do about it?" When he made it up to me and was just about to put his hands on me, I punched at least a 6'5", at least man in the face. It didn't exactly drop him, but it knocked him down. He fell back and kind of bumped into his van and fell on his ass in front of it. To put things into perspective, I'm 5'8", and at the time, I had some really extra weight on me, if you can say that, so I wasn't a tiny, helpless little girl. After this, he got up. With a vengeance, he threw punch after punch after punch. So did I. I was starting to get weak. My arms felt like spaghetti and I couldn't see a thing. I could hear my stepdaughter screaming and my cousin yelling for help from the upstairs window. I wiped my eyes, and to my surprise, I saw my other neighbor restraining John. He was still trying to attack me, even being restrained. I was bleeding badly, but I didn't realize it right away. My nose was broken. My 4'9" cousin was standing in the front yard with a metal chair over her head, and my stepdaughter was taken inside with my other neighbor's kids. John was screaming at me, telling me my bird shits in his house, even though my bird was 3 floors above him, and even shit on my floor. I was just screaming back at him, calling him crazy, a diddler, and telling him nobody wants him here. It felt like a segment of Jerry Springer in between a KY jelly wrestling match and a 2 lesbian in a whipped cream pool. I ran upstairs to look for my cousin's vagina of a husband, and he was in the window calling the police. When I realized he was useless, I headed back out. John was gone. He took off. The rescue and police arrived when I was questioned, then taken to the hospital. I was released soon after and was about to head over to pick up my ex, whom hadn't even know what happened yet, but I couldn't find my keys. My house and car keys. We checked everywhere and couldn't find them. I started feeling like John stole them before he took off. But they were with my phone. Why wouldn't he have taken my phone? I called the police station and they informed me he was picked up. I took a shot in the dark and asked if they found my keys on him. I described the keys. Green NY Yankees bat, keychain, etc. They confirmed yes, he did have them. They asked me if I would like to press further charges. I of course said yes. There was no contact order active, but technically, they could not make him leave the house. It was up to my landlord. My landlord kicked them the fuck out. Not before they could squeeze some stalking and harassing in. My good neighbors turned their security cameras on, facing our house. One morning, his girlfriend was standing in front of the house, yelling up at us with all kinds of nasty shit. When we watched it on the footage, what we couldn't see was he was standing right at our door. She was the bait, he was the hook. Thank God we never bite. We caught him doing other creepy shit, like him crawling around my car, not even doing anything, just crawling around the car like a fucking cat or something. Weird shit. They moved out and it was peaceful the rest of the time we were there. I still see them here and there, usually walking and usually looking angry. Good, crazy crackhead neighbors. Let's not meet ever again. I dodged a bullet named John Zimmerman. Okay, I don't really know any of this is the right sub, and I'm not a great storyteller. This may not be overly interesting, as over 1,900 girls were also involved. But it's something I still think about from time to time, and it still scares me. I'm now a 23-year-old female nurse, but around 2008 I just got my license, and I was a bit of a fangirl with any band that played in my town. I live in Australia, and where I live hardly anyone noteworthy ever comes. Back in the day of MySpace, I was an avid user. This guy named Zemo contacted me and said he was the manager of one of my all-time favorite bands, The Getaway Plan. I was chuffed. He told me I was pretty. We went on webcam together. We talked often, and we eventually exchanged numbers after he said they were coming to play in my town. I was also offered free tickets. Too good to be true, right? But I already had my ticket. I was 17, and very naive. A few other girls I went to school with had also been talking to him. Before they played, he was texting me, saying we should hang out, have some fun, and chill in our undies or something like that. I thought it was weird, but I was going straight from work to the gig, so I couldn't. The gig was amazing. I could see him on his phone to the side of the stage, and my friend and I left. Just as I got to my car, I got a message from him, asking if I could take him and possibly his friend for a drive. Red flags started popping up. My friend and I decided it's not a good idea, and after that night, I never heard from him again. I guess he knew he'd get nothing from me, and he had plenty of other girls hanging off him. Skip to 2 years down the track, I'm on a nursing placement in a hospital, on my break, and my phone rings. I answer. The person is female. Hello. I'm a police officer in Victoria. I was just calling to speak to you about a person you've been in contact with in 2008 named John Zimmerman. I want you to know he's now in jail, and he will not be able to hurt you. I froze. And it took me at least 5 minutes to realize who John Zimmerman was. My head was swimming. The woman told me he had been grooming girls online and blackmailing them. Nearly 80 charges had been laid. I told her the contact I'd had with him and that he wanted me to take him for a drive the night he was in town, and I immediately directed her to a few other girls who had known who had been hanging out with him. I never asked the other girls if the police had contacted him. I know this story isn't super thrilling, but it reminds me every day to follow my gut. You can Google him. I'll post some links in the comments if I can figure out how. Elementary school weirdo. Around 4th grade, my best friend and I, also a girl, became friends with 2 boys our age, named John and Mike. I never thought much about them, because they never did anything to raise suspicion until 5th grade. I don't know what it was about the 5th grade mark, but boys, especially John, were growing increasingly fond of me and my friend. As we grew more uncomfortable with how they were looking at and talking to us, we told them to back off. Mike got the point. John took it up a notch. On one occasion, John followed my mom's car home from school whilst on his bike. I noticed him following us, so I told my mom to pull in a random driveway, which she did. He kept on riding. Some days I would have to walk home from school to my aunt's house instead of riding with my mom. When John saw me walking one day alone, he started following me. I was already close to my aunt's house, so I figured I'd just run inside and tell my aunt to make him leave. So to better understand this part, you'll need to know how my aunt's fence is set up. To get to the door, you had to enter a gate that swung inwards towards another wall that blocked the outside world from the backyard. So as I approached the gate, John said, "Is this where you actually live?" I told him I was visiting a friend and that I had to go. He then told me, "I'm sure you're just lying, because you just don't want me looking your window at night," which I'll do either way. Completely frightened, I quickly entered the gate and tried to close it on him. Unfortunately, he was much stronger than me. He pushed the swinging gate with me behind it to where he had me pinned against the cement wall and said, "Where do you think you're going?" He slowly started to increase the pressure on the gate to where I could barely breathe. So I let out a yelp. Luckily, my aunt was on the lookout for me because I was later than usual, and she opened the door and saw what was going on and screamed at him to leave. I honestly wish I had made this up. To this day, I have issues with trusting men. It makes it worse to know that he was only around 11 years old and doing things like this. Later on, in middle school, he was expelled from the school district I was in for groping another male student in the bathroom. I have not seen him since. So yeah, creepy stalker friend, let's never meet again. Did my boyfriend terrorize me? This happened a couple months ago. I'm a 17-year-old female. I was house sitting for my parents as they had gone away for 2 weeks, and so I thought I'd have my boyfriend stop over to keep me company. My house is an old converted farmhouse out in the sticks with no neighbors or main roads around, very secluded and peaceful. Anyways, one night, he went out drinking with his friends. He is 18, so legal to drink in the UK. I was just sitting in the living room reading a book. Around midnight, I heard a single loud and aggressive knock on the front door. I momentarily panicked, given the lateness and the fact that we had no neighbors and nobody ever passes by here, but then I thought maybe it was my boyfriend coming home drunk and had forgotten his key. I didn't have a text from him to say he was coming home, but like I say, he was drunk, maybe he forgot. I went to the front door and said, "Hello? Is that you, John?" My boyfriend's name. No answer. So I opened the door a touch and peered outside. Nobody there, weird. I shut the door and locked it again. Maybe I was hearing things, I thought. But 30 minutes later, I heard pounding on the back door. Really hard and angry pounding. It lasted about 3 seconds and stopped. I was freaking out, obviously, and immediately texted my boyfriend asking him to come home, as I was scared, as I heard pounding on the back door, and I think I should maybe ring the police. I was debating ringing the police when I heard the front door open, close, and then silence. Now, the room I was in had a door separating it from the hallway, where the front door is. As you can imagine, I was shaking with fear. Whoever was doing this was now inside my house, with just a door between us. Next thing I hear is nails clawing at the door of the room I was in, as if somebody were slowly scratching the door, but with force. It was genuinely the stuff of horror movies at this point, and I did the first thing that came to my mind, which was scream and threw a vase at the door. Don't ask me why. I don't know what I was expecting to do other than smash that to the ground, but hey-oh. Then, silence. I heard the front door open again and then slam shut, and footsteps on the gravel outside the front of my house. I did call the police. They found no signs of forced entry, and searched the property inside and out and found nobody. They found muddy footprints in the hallway, which the intruder must have gone from the back garden, which is very muddy in winter. The front is all gravel, so no mud there. After they had gone, about 30 minutes later, my boyfriend comes home. The first thing I noticed was that he didn't seem drunk at all. He'd been out since 7 p.m. and it was now like 2 a.m. in the morning, and usually he stinks of alcohol after a night out. He seemed stone cold sober and no alcohol smell. I told him that someone had gone into the house, and I didn't know how, as only he and I have keys. that there were no forced entry, etc. He said, well, did you definitely lock the door after you'd opened it after hearing the knock earlier? This confused me, because I hadn't told him about the knock on the front door. I just told him the guy had gone in, and that I'd heard pounding on the back door. So how did he know that I had even opened the door? I also noticed his boots were muddy, which is strange, because he got a taxi to go see his friends earlier, and only walked in the front garden to the taxi, which I said, there was no mud there. The back garden does, however, and somebody was pounding on the back door earlier. I questioned it, and he said that he got the money outside the pub, but that's all street there, so I don't see how he could have. And to think of it, I don't recall hearing a taxi pull up when he arrived home. Usually because it's so quiet, you can hear the taxi pull up outside. I don't know if I'm being majorly paranoid here or not, but I suspect my boyfriend of being the one behind that incident. We've been together for a year, and he's never shown any weird behavior like this before or since, but I have an overwhelming instinct that he was behind what happened, only he had a key to get in, and I definitely did lock it. I made sure after hearing a creepy knock that the door was definitely locked after seeing no one outside. I wouldn't have forgotten to lock it. It's been a couple of months since I've mentioned this to him or anyone other than you guys, but what should I do? Should I bring this up? Am I just being paranoid? I'm really confused, but my gut instinct is telling me that he was behind this, even though I'd be heartbroken if that were true. And if that was him, why would he do this? He says he loves me, and acts like he loves me. He's comforted me a lot at night, and didn't leave me alone again until my parents returned, so I don't understand why he want to scare me like that. Edit. Whenever I mention that night to him, he always says to change the subject, and his reason is because he hates to think about what could have happened to me, and feels guilty for leaving me alone, and that I should forget it and just move on now. I think by posting this, I have decided I need to confront my boyfriend about this. There's no other way I can get past it and relax again. I hope my instincts are wrong, but I will let you all know what happened once I do it. I'll do it soon, in the next week, because I need to put my mind at ease once and for all. Thank you all for the feedback so far. My stalker with hepatitis. I am not entirely sure how this happened to me, but if you ask most people I know personally, they will tell you that I have a weird problem with attracting creepazoids. I don't know if it's because I'm rather petite in stature and perhaps I don't look like someone who can fight back, or because I somehow come off as sweet and endearing to people who don't realize as they're only getting my customer service face. I get followed around frequently, and I've had a few different stalkers. This is exaggerated by the fact that I tend to be a bit clueless at first when someone is being creepy, and will tend to try to give someone the benefit of the doubt. This is one of the more interesting encounters I've had. I was barista for a while for Starbucks. I worked in proper Starbucks locations and half the bastardized versions inside other stores. Safeway, Target, Walmart, the licensed concept stores. This in particular happened while I worked at one of the licensed stores. My manager wanted us to create personal connections by getting the person's name and creating short talk. I'm not great with names, but I have a good eye for faces and remembering a face to a drink. This guy walks up, and he has a complete prison tattoos. They're only line art, and not a good line art. Also, they're from Dungeons and Dragons. I can get down in some D&D. This is going to turn into our talking point. The tattoos are some Egyptian-style gods. Let's say his name is John. I nickname him John the Tattoo Guy. He always gets a venti caramel sauce white chocolate mocha. He begins to come in 3 or 4 times a week. One day, I get a somewhat weird situation. He pauses and stares at me and asks, "Have you been avoiding me?" I laugh, and at the time, I didn't realize something wrong was happening. I said, "No, maybe you've been avoiding me. I've been at school a lot." He nods, walks off. My coworker grabs my hand, and her voice drops. "He's been coming in here every day, looking for you. He checks under the counters. I pause and stare at her and decide that maybe this guy has just some social disorder that makes him a bit awkward or something. He comes back in. About a week later, I'm having a conversation with other customers about donating blood. I've always been a firm believer in donating blood whenever possible. I myself am afraid of needles, but I use it to try to get over my fear. Without a beat, and in a very friendly way, John the tattoo guy says, "I can't donate blood." "Oh, why not? Are you afraid of needles too?" "No, I have hep C, but don't worry, you can't get it unless we have really rough sex." Keep in mind, I've only ever had very basic conversations with him. 2-sentence conversations, basically. I laugh nervously, give him his coffee, and go back to making other coffee. Soon after, I have a security guard come over. I almost think he must have heard the conversation. Turns out, John the tattoo guy was actually stealing from the stores in the area, and the security guard wanted me to flirt with him and find out where he lived. John and my old security guard? Let's not meet again, Kay. What did he have planned? This happened when I was either 5 or 6 years old. I have Asperger's, although I went undiagnosed for my entire childhood. My grandmother who raised me was very old school, and I think the idea that her granddaughter was a flawed child was unthinkable. Anyways, part of my condition is that I have a difficult time picking up on subtle social cues. As a kid, this made me extremely gullible, and I tended to believe what people told me at face value. A lot of backstory, I know, but it's important to understand the context of the story. Not to mention what got me into the situation in the first place. So, one Saturday afternoon, I was playing in the fenced area of my grandmother's front yard. Normal kid stuff mostly. I think I had my Barbies with me. All of a sudden, this neighborhood kid I didn't know pokes his head over the fence and says hello. He was twice my age, dark hair, dark eyes. I can't remember his name, so for the sake of the story, I'll be calling him John. Now, stranger danger was something that was drilled into our heads over and over again at school, but it was always about adults. No one ever once warned us about going anywhere with kids we didn't know. At some point, I told John it was getting too hot to play outside, but I was going inside to play video games on my then brand new NES. This was when he told me that he had a bunch of NES cartridges to give me for free if I went over to his house. Thank God my grandmother had more sense than a 5-year-old autistic kid. She told me that the only way I was going to a 12-year-old boy's house was if she knew where his house was and his phone number. John happily complied with this request, but even my grandmother didn't expect that John not only had deliberately given her the wrong address, but the wrong phone number as well. As we were walking to John's house, he suddenly turned straight towards a wooded area behind the house, lining a curve in the road. Even as a gullible kid, I suspected something was up. I asked John why we weren't going to his house. "I actually lied," he admitted. "I don't live in a house. My parents are dead." For most normal kids, this would be a sign to nope the fuck out of there. If a kid's parents were dead, no way in hell would he be living in the woods in Arizona. But between my age and my disorder, I not only believed John, but I pitied him, too. He told me he still had the cartridges for me, and like an idiot, I believed him, and followed him into the woods. After about 30 minutes of following John, I knew something was seriously wrong. The alarm bells were finally going off. I told him I wanted to go home. I didn't want his NES cartridges anymore. After a pause, John said, "Okay," and started leaving me back the way we came. But he kept stopping, moving in false starts, looking around. Finally, he said that he'd made a mistake, and now he was lost. That made me mad and scared. I knew he was lying. I told him to take me back to my grandma's house now, that it was too hot and I was thirsty. By this time, it was late afternoon, around 4 or so. This is where I look back and get seriously creeped out. John looked at me and smiled. You're thirsty? Why didn't you say so? He led the way to a leftover rain puddle that hadn't been dried up yet. I stared at him. Did he really expect me to drink from that? I don't have a cup, I told him. Just get down and drink it like a dog, he said. I got down on my knees, but I only took the water to cool off with it. Even as a little kid, I know you're never supposed to drink dirty water. While I was wetting my forehead and neck down to cool off, John started churning up the water to make it muddy, still trying to convince me that it was fine, and that I should lap it up like a dog. What the fuck, kid? After a while, I realized I could hear the familiar sound, the major highway that ran perpendicular to the road that led into my neighborhood. Looking down the hill we were on, I could even just barely make out the cars traveling down it. I didn't even hesitate. I ran all the way down that hill, with John calling after me. I couldn't hear what he said, and I didn't care. If I found the highway, I could find my way back home. I climbed a barbed wire fence and ripped a hole in the pants I was wearing, getting to the highway. John caught up to me once I reached the sidewalk, telling me to come back into the woods with him. No! I shouted at him. I'm going home! At this point, a police car came up to where we were standing. My grandma had called the number John gave her, only to find out it was the wrong number. Once she went to the house he described, and it was the wrong one, she called the police. So this cop asked my name and I told him. He said my grandma was worried about me, and I was so happy to see him I started crying. Then another car pulled up. A woman stuck her head out the window. John, get your ass into this car, right now! My stomach dropped. I looked up at John. I thought you said you lived in the woods. The woman's face contorted further in her anger. No, he doesn't live in the woods. I'm his mother. At this point, the cop told both of them to stay put, and he put me into the car. I couldn't hear what was being said, but in the end, the cop let John go into his mother's car, and he drove me home. My grandma was plenty pissed at me for going with John after he told me he lived in the woods, but I think she was just glad to have me back, unharmed. It wasn't until years later that I realized how fucked up the entire situation was. To this day, I don't know why John wanted to lure a 5-year-old girl into the woods, but I'm glad I never found out. If you're reading this, John, even if you weren't planning to hurt me that day, you're still one sick fuck. Let's never meet again. If we do, I'll probably end up punching you in the fucking teeth. I thought my ex was the problem. As I am submitting this, I'm wondering if I'm overreacting, but I won't know until someone hears the story. A few months ago, I was having some issues with an ex. He didn't beat me or physically abuse me or anything like that. We were just in another argument about how on and off we were all the time. This story isn't about him. I walked with my friend after school to the coffee place that was in between the two high schools in the area. The schools are rivals, but in good spirit, so technically, only during football season. Although that's not important, we walked to the coffee place and watched as the kids from both schools came piling in. One guy in particular caught my attention, if only because he was cute. My friend and I giggled and pointed, maybe not subtly, and then feigned sad looks as he left. But then he came back, exiting again through the other door, and then once more as a joke, we laughed and I asked him, "Oh, did you miss me that much you had to come back?" He had a friend with him, who very guy-like punched his shoulder. "This fool thought you were pretty and made us come back 3 times. I widened my eyes at my friend, who then looked at him. "Oh, really? Is that true?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, it's true." Then he slid into the booth beside me, and his friend next to my friend. We shrugged at each other and just accepted that 2 attractive guys were sitting next to us. After about an hour or so of just talking to them, they had to go. The guy who sat next to me, we'll call him John, got up and kissed the top of my head, which in hindsight is weirder than I thought at the time. but I really didn't care or notice. We should do this again. Same time tomorrow? John asked. I looked at my friend, who nodded vigorously. Sure, I said, smiling. It's a date. Naturally, the next day, the same thing occurred. We met up, we hung out for an hour. I talked to John mostly. My friend talked to John's friend. Same thing? Same thing tomorrow, same time, and we agreed. Sadly, the next day I was busy. I texted him and told him that my friend would be heading down, but that I wouldn't. I never got a response, so I figured that it was fine. Until my friend called me about an hour later. John and I had talked a little bit about our past in those 2 hours, and we both knew a little bit about each other. He'd also heard me talking to my friend about my ex. Hey Jem, what's wrong? John's a fucking psycho. You need to stay away from him. Wait, what? Why? What happened? I'm gone one day and you can't be... This is serious. I walked in, expecting to see John and Chris, but it's only John. As soon as he saw me, he smiled and got up, walking over to me. This sounds really menacing, Jen, I said sarcastically. Would you just shut the fuck up and listen? We walked outside, and he grabbed me by the shoulders and was on the verge of screaming. He just kept repeating over and over, where is she? Is she with him? She said she was done. I really like her. She can't do this. And I barely had enough time to get away from him and call you. I'm with my friend right now. She picked me up. In all honesty, I didn't want to believe her. Jen, are you okay? I'm fine, but B, you need to be careful. I promised just that. But as soon as we hung up, John texted me. Hey, sorry you missed it today. Jen and I had fun talking though. See you tomorrow? I felt creeped out. And I felt creeped for months. He hasn't done anything since. I told him to go away. I guess $500 sounded like a good offer. This incident happened a year or two ago, again at a tanning salon. As I mentioned in my previous post, I've been working for a tanning company for 7 years, and I've encountered my fair share of creeps. I've been working at this particular location for about 3 years at this point, and had quite a few regulars. Most are very sweet people, who were usually in and out pretty quickly, but we did have a few people who lingered, spent a few hours talking to you, and could just tell we're very lonely. This was the case of John. John was an older gentleman, late 60s, hobbled with the help of a cane, gave off an odd vibe, but overall seemed harmless. I got to know John pretty well, learned that he had no family or friends. His mother passed a few years earlier, and he was still pretty distraught over it. We bonded over the fact that he was in the military, and talked about his deployments, as my boyfriend was a Marine, and was deployed at the time. I learned very quickly that John liked to gamble. He was always grabbing lotto tickets from the grocery store next door, and his first trip after getting his disability check was to the casino. John soon started buying me scratch-off tickets as well. It was fun at first. He brings me a ticket here and there, and we'd scratch them as we chatted. This started to become an everyday event, and I began to feel uncomfortable. I asked John to stop buying me scratch-offs, as it just didn't sit well with me. He obliged and things went back to normal. It was around this time that I went on vacation. My boyfriend was coming home from deployment, so I went to his base to welcome him. We spent 2 weeks on vacation and had an awesome time. I was now looking forward to returning to work. My first day back, John comes in. As expected. We get to talk about my trip and how nice it was to finally see my boyfriend after months apart. We spent about 45 minutes talking about the details of my trip when John interrupts to ask if he could ask me a question. Odd? I replied, sure. I just recently received my disability check and was wondering if I paid you $500, would you have sex with me? What? I was a bit taken aback, but not completely out of it. I quickly came to my senses. I said no, I would never do that. I told him he needed to leave the premises and never return to our store. I called the police to file a report, mainly because I have plenty of young girls that work for me and would never want them encountering this creep. They take his information. Luckily, we have his address and everything in our computer system, and because he was caught offering a specific amount on our surveillance video, he would be arrested for soliciting. He was arrested, and I hoped to never see him again. A few weeks later, I'm checking out at the grocery store, yep, the one located next to the tanning salon. As I'm walking out, I look to my right in a small eating area. Lo and behold, there he is, staring at me from a bench. I pick up my pace and make my way to the parking lot. This crazy starts screaming my name, hobbling after me, waving his cane in the air, calling me a bitch and every other name known to man. This was a crowded parking lot. People were staring like, what the hell is going on? I turned around, screamed at the top of my lungs for him to leave me the fuck alone, and proceeded to my car. Never saw him again.